Hello, lovely artists. It's Mrs. Cloet here in the Great Big Art Room, and today we are going to do an introduction to acrylic paint techniques. So how do we load our brush with paint? How do we choose the brushes that we're going to use? And how do we know when I have too much paint on my brush and when I have not enough? We know that that's really the ticket to creating crisp edges. In this first introductory project, our goal is to create crisp edges. It's to learn how to hold our paintbrush, how to load our brush with paint, and then how to apply that paint on our paper to get that beautiful crisp edge. And it's really just a collection of techniques. So to start, I have a clean brush. I'm actually going to want to dip it in water just so that it's not totally dry. I touch my paintbrush on paper towel pretty regularly. What I don't want is to have a soaking wet brush. I definitely don't want a dripping brush with water. So now it's wet. I'm going to dip it into my acrylic paint in the palette, you can see. And I'm going to show you first what too much paint looks like. So here's my brush. I'm going to bring it nice and close. You can see here that it is no longer the shape, a recognizable shape of that pointy round brush look. You can see I've got a major glob out here, and then even on this side, it's still feeling like I've got way too much paint. It no longer feels like that round, pointy bristle edge. So when I have too much, I can do a few things. I'm going to scrape it on the side, and I like to spin it around, just so that I'm helping keep that bristle point. Now I can see I have plenty of paint, but it's still feeling like a recognizable pointy bristle edge. That's where I know I've got the right amount of paint. When I apply it on my paper, the big part here is the angle of your brush. So if I'm wanting to paint along this line, let's say I have an imaginary line here, or maybe I'll make a quick line. I might even make it swoopy. So I have a swoopy line, and I'm wanting to, what I would call pull my paint along that edge, but I want to have a really crisp edge. If I hold my round brush perpendicular, like the letter T, to that line, what's going to happen is the pressure when I pull my brush is going to split those bristles. So here's another brush. It's going to split them like this. And when I split the bristles, that's where I get that fuzzy, not crisp edge that we're trying to avoid. So instead, I have to hold my hand and hold my brush along the line that I'm following. So again, I don't want to be holding my my brush in a perpendicular way, like the letter T here. That's going to split the bristles and make that furry look. Instead, I'm wanting to change the position of my arm and the way I hold the brush so that the actual handle of the brush is pointing in the direction that I want to go. And what I'm doing now is then pulling the paint along this edge. So I can go nice and slowly. If you've seen me paint before, I always have my head really close to the page, probably too close. So I am pulling the paint along that edge, and I'm going to do it a little too long so that you can see it starts to get fuzzy in a second. Because at some point I'm going to run out of paint on that side of my brush. There it starts to split. See, it's getting light here. Somewhere around here is when I can start to notice that I'm running out of paint. So one option, the first option I would do is spin my brush around, because I know I have more paint on this side. I'm going to try to follow that exact line. I'm positioning my brush so that it is following that pull line, and now I need to reload. So yes, I've been able to get a little bit more out because I spun my brush and used the paint on the opposite side, but now my paint is too thin and it's starting to split. So I need to reload my brush. Again, I like to fully saturate it so I know there's paint even inside the bristles, and then I like to spin it on the edge of my palette just to make sure I don't have, too much. I definitely don't want too much. I want to be able to still control where that paint goes. And then I can continue on. And I often see students that forget that they have the ability to turn their page. So spin your page as needed, and then spin your brush as needed to create that really beautiful crisp edge. I'm going to reload again, spin on the side, and pull my paint along that crisp edge. Okay, I have a little divot here where it's not quite smooth, so I'm going to go back, reload just a little bit, and pull that paint so that it's perfectly smooth. If I have a little too much paint, then you get what's called a bead where the paint is thicker on the one side. It almost feels like a little hill on the one side, and I can use that to my advantage in that I can pull that extra paint and spread it around. But if I leave it there, then I start to get chunky, dry sections where it dries in a lump, and we're trying to avoid that. So now you can see I'm using the inside edge of my brush to get a crisp edge. And again, you'll notice the way I'm holding the brush, the end or the handle is pointing the direction that I want to go. I'm consciously thinking about how much paint I have on the bristles all the time, when I need to reload, and when I've got enough paint that I can create that crisp edge. Okay? I'm going to show you now what happens if I hold my brush the wrong way. So I load my brush, but instead I decide to hold it perpendicular. So I'm going to hold it along this edge and then paint. And you'll see what happens. If I hold my brush this direction, even if I hold it higher up, then the dry edge here I can't control. So just me pulling along there is splitting the bristles that you can see, and that's why I get these rough areas. I'm going to do that one more time. I'm going to load my brush properly. I'm going to spin it properly on the side of my palette so I can keep that nice rounded look of my round brush. But just holding it in the wrong position is going to make it split apart. There it is, right? Even holding it right, I'm just getting that split happening where the bristles start to separate, and that is really, really difficult to control, and that's where I'm getting kind of these raw edges. So the big piece, of course, is the amount of paint on your brush, but also the position of your brush. So I'm going to fix this now by holding my brush on the right angle. So I'm pointing my handle the direction I want to go, and I can fix it. What is so great about acrylic paint is that if you let it dry, and it dries very quickly, so it doesn't take long, if you let it dry, you can paint over top of it, and you can fix your mistakes. Even if you have the wrong value, maybe you made it too dark, maybe you made it too light, you can still go back and paint over top and fix your mistakes. So in that way, acrylic paint can be lovely to work with. There we go. I'm going to go back and I'm going to smooth out that bead line so I don't get any thick areas. There we go. I think I can do a better job of just this spot right here. I'll just make this area a little wider. Smooth out this edge. So you see I reload my brush, but then I also spin my brush. So I'm using all the paint that I need. So now you can see how we create this crisp edge and what we want to avoid. It's really, again, about the volume of paint on your brush, how you hold the brush, and how often you refill your brush with paint. So I'm going to pause this, and I'm going to jump into a shape, kind of what we've done in class together, but I'm needing to fill this kind of organic shape with black paint, and I just want to walk you through that. So I'm feeling like the size of this area is pretty tight, so this brush feels a little too big. Could you do it with this brush? For sure you could, but I think it's going to be easier for me as an artist to switch to my smaller round brush. So here I am dipping it in water. Okay, I'm getting all the extra water off, and then I'm going to load my brush. You saw me do this before where I know I have the bristles saturated, but I definitely am avoiding the big blobs. This feels too blobby, so I'm going to spin it on the side of my palette just to make sure I don't have too much. Then this feels like it's going to be hard for me to fill, so I'm going to spin it around because that's going to be easier for me to go in this direction. Oops. Spin my palette's moving too. There we go. So I'm going to start in this area, and I want to pull the bristles, and I fill this part first so I can just see where my bristles or how my bristles are working. This paintbrush happens to have this really pointy edge, This could be frustrating. I might switch to another brush, but I could also use it as an advantage. So I have this really tiny tip. Maybe I load that and just work really slowly to fill this area. When I'm working with the tip, then I know I'm going to have to reload that brush fairly regularly if it's so small. But a small brush is really easy to control, or much easier to control than some of the big edges with these fine details. What's nice about an organic shape like this is it can be fairly forgiving. So if it's a little wider in one area, that's okay. You can fix your mistakes fairly easily. So I'm going to spin again. Reload just a little bit. And now I'm going to switch. You saw I was going to do this, but that would make my bristles split. So I'm changing my position, my hand position, so I can pull the paint along that round edge to create the really crisp edge. And then I go in and I notice the kind of thicker bead area, and I pull that so that I get a smooth surface. And I'm going to pull that bead, and I can see I'm losing, I don't have enough paint, so I'm going to reload quick. And in this section where it's really big and forgiving, then it can be fairly quick. And I smooth out my edges, smooth out those kind of thicker bead areas, and then spin. I'm going to fix this and pull my paint again. And as I'm painting, I'm always considering when to reload. When do I need more paint? What is that perfect amount of paint on my brush that is easiest to control and is getting the look that I want? I'm going to actually go in the opposite direction and pull down, pull towards me instead for this area. And then I have this tiny little dot. So I'm actually going to put paint there, spin my brush so I have very little on it, and then I'm going to push that paint that's there around. When you have really fine details, then of course having too much paint can be really frustrating. So I have to work slowly. I'm going to spin it all the way around and work here instead, in this direction. And I kind of want to cover those pencil lines. So that's helping me figure out how far I need to go. There we go. Okay, and then I can kind of speed up over here where it's thicker and more forgiving. And then I'm using the inside of my brush to pull my paint along that inside edge. So you can see it's a pretty relaxing process, but it's a slow process. And for you to get those crisp, kind of printer-like edges, you really do have to be thoughtful and controlled in your methods. And you may find that when you've got your really tiny, delicate areas done, that you jump into your thick areas and you change brushes to speed up the process. This fine little detail area, I'm glad I used my small round brush. A little bit more paint. Pull along that area. Ooh, the sun's coming out in here. The lighting just changed. Now you can probably see even better. And I go back and I fix and I fix and I fix until I've got it just right. One more go at this section. There we go. So I'm going to stop there. So you can see I've got, oh, you know what? I might just fix this one little section. It feels a little bumpy. So I'm going to go back, fill my brush a little bit, get it on just the right angle, and smooth out this section. This edge feels like it's not quite the way I want it. Just remember, you can always spin your paper around. I find that easier than sticking my elbow up in the air or standing up. There we go. So we've kind of introduced the concept of how to get a very crisp edge, how to avoid this kind of hairy, fuzzy look. We've talked about how to hold your brush properly. You want to be pulling the paint along the line of the direction you're looking to go. And you're always checking that when you load your brush, that you're loading just the right amount of paint. Too much, we know, is really difficult to control and feels blobby and messy. Not enough then splits or dries the bristles, and then you get that kind of fuzzy look. So there's lots of things to think about, but you can see that when you work really slowly, you end up being able to control the amount of paint and the position of the paint so that you can create those crisp edges. All right, have fun.